The whole world was united and God came down to interrupt. There was no war, there was no famine, there was no chaos. There was order, strength, and a tower rising towards the sky. One man led it all. His name was Nimrod. And what he built wasn't just a city. It was the first human-made system designed to function without God. But why did God intervene at Babel? What was behind that tower that made the heavens act? What dangerous truth had to be hidden for centuries? The Bible summarizes the story in a few verses, but it hides a deep mystery. Nimrod didn't just want to touch the sky, he wanted to replace God on earth. The Tower of Babel wasn't a construction error, it was a calculated plan, a silent challenge to the Creator, a system designed to never again depend on heaven. Who exactly was Nimrod? Why is he called powerful but never just? What did God see when he decided to come down and confuse the languages? And why does the spirit of Babel seem so present even today? Stay with us until the end and find out the untold story of Nimrod, the hidden truth about the Tower of Babel, the first human empire, and the system that tried to thwart God's plan. Because some stories didn't stay in the past, they continue to resonate in our time. Today you're going to learn a story that's almost never told in its entirety. The story of Nimrod, a man who emerged shortly after the flood and changed the course of humanity by attempting to build a world without God. Stay with us until the end, because what began in Babel did not remain in the past. It still echoes in our days. The world was still learning to breathe after the flood. The waters had receded, but fear remained. Noah's families walked the earth cautiously, knowing that God's judgment was not a distant story, but a living memory. Every swollen river, every dark cloud in the sky made hearts ache. It was in this world marked by fear that he was born Nimrod. The Bible begins its story briefly, but with great weight. The record is in Genesis 10:8, and it says, "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth." Nimrod was a direct descendant of Noah. His grandfather was Cam, Noah's son, whose lineage bore the marks of judgment and tension. His father, Cuckoo Nimrod, was a well-known man among the clans, strong, respected, a leader of many. The scriptures do not reveal the name of Nimrod's mother, nor do they directly mention siblings. But they make it clear that he was born into an influential family in a fertile region that would later become known as Plain of Shinar, territory that would give rise to the great cities of Babylon. The name Nimrodit was not common. Ancient Hebrew traditions link its meaning to the idea of rebel, one who rises up or one who challenges. For many, that name sounded too heavy for a newborn. "Why give the boy that name?" asked an old man, observing the baby in his mother's arms. "Because he will not be ordinary," Cush replied firmly. "Or because it will bring problems," murmured another in a low voice. From an early age, Nimrod stood out. He wasn't just bigger or stronger than the other children. There was something in his gaze. He observed more than he played. He stared more than he looked away. He didn't cry as easily. He didn't flinch at loud noises or the presence of animals. While other children hid, he approached. "That boy has no fear," a man once said, seeing Nimrod confronting a trapped animal. "You'll learn eventually," another replied. "Or, he'll never learn," a third person added. The world in which Nimrod grew up was deeply religious but driven by fear. God was respected but also feared. The stories of the flood were told repeatedly to new generations as a warning and a reminder. "Never forget," said an elder around the fire. God already destroyed the world once. Nimrod listened in silence. As the years passed, his strength grew rapidly. His movements were firm. His presence commanded respect. Even at a young age, the adults began to notice that when Nimrod approached, conversations subsided. People watched. Some felt safe, others uneasy. "He walks like he knows where he's going," commented a tribal leader. And as if without asking permission, another replied. The name Nimrod began to circulate among the tents. It was mentioned in conversations, in warnings, in cautious praise. His father, Cush, realized that his son was attracting more attention than usual. "They look at you differently," she said one night. "They only see me," Nimrod replied, looking at the fire. The Bible makes a rare statement about him. It doesn't say he was blessed. It doesn't say he was called. It says something unusual. He began to be powerful on earth. It doesn't talk about faith. It doesn't talk about obedience. It speaks of power. And in that world that still feared God's wrath, something new, silent and dangerous was being born. A kind of force that did not depend on prayer. A power that did not arise from submission, but from presence. While Noah's families tried to rebuild their lives in obedience, one boy grew up with something different in his heart, something that did not tremble before heaven. And the question that was beginning to emerge, still unanswered, echoed silently among those who observed this unusual growth. What kind of power was being born along with Nimrod? Time passed without warning. The boy grew up while the world tried to forget its fear of the waters. Families scattered across the open lands, seeking space, food, and safety. But beyond the fields lay dense forests full of strange sounds and dangerous animals. Few dared to venture there. Nimrod entered. His body grew strong too early. His movements were firm. He observed the wind, the tracks on the ground, the behavior of the beasts. While others learned to avoid danger, he learned to face it. Not out of recklessness, but out of mastery. "Don't go so far," A man warned one morning, seeing him heading towards the woods. "Someone needs to go," Nimrod replied without looking back. Soon stories began to emerge. A lion that attacked herds was found dead near the river. A large boar that spread panic disappeared. Beasts that once made men tremble were now being vanquished. There was always someone who would say, "Rod was there." The villagers began to feel safer when he was around. The nights became quieter. The mothers slept with less fear. The children played without constantly looking into the darkness. "As long as Nimrod is here, nothing can reach us," a man said. "He faces what we fear," another replied. Protection turned into dependence without them realizing it. But it wasn't just the animals that fell silent before him. Men did too. When Nimrod arrived, conversation subsided. When he spoke, others listened. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence commanded respect. The elders began to notice. "People are paying more attention to him than to us," one of them said, sounding worried. "They feel safe," another replied. "Security is not leadership," the first one retorted, but it was too late. The Bible summarizes this period in a few words recorded in Genesis 10-9. "He was a mighty hunter before the Lord." Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The phrase began to circulate as a title. It was repeated in tents on paths around the fire. "He is valiant before the Lord," some said with admiration. "God sees him," others affirmed, but not everyone took that as a compliment. "What does it mean to stand before the Lord?" an elder asked one night. "It means that God blesses you," replied a younger man. "Or that God is watching over him," the old man corrected in a low voice. The expression was ancient and laden with meaning. To be before the Lord has always been linked to reverence, submission, and fear. But Nimrod did not seem to fear. He did not bow down. He did not ask for direction. He acted as one who already knew the way. "He doesn't ask for advice," commented a tribal leader. "He doesn't ask for permission," another added. Even so, they continued to follow him. Gradually, hunting ceased to be merely about survival. It became a demonstration of power. Each beast subdued reinforced a dangerous idea. If he could control nature, he could also control men. The people began calling on him before seeking out the elders, before praying, before waiting. "Call Nimrod," they said. "He'll sort it out." Oh, and so almost without realizing it, a title was born. Not given by God, not confirmed by heaven, but repeated by the mouths of men, "a valiant hunter before the Lord." The phrase echoed growing up if he signed, but a silent doubt began to arise in the hearts of those who still remembered how God deals with men. Being before the Lord meant approval or a challenge. The doubt wasn't spoken aloud, but it was everywhere. The world remained marked by the memory of the waters. A heavier rain was enough to turn eyes to the sky. A river rising even slightly was enough to tighten hearts. The flood had passed, but the fear remained. The people lived scattered, insecure, trying to obey God while struggling with the fear of a new judgment. Faith existed, but it was fragile. Many obeyed more out of fear than out of trust. Nimrod realized this. He observed the faces during the meetings. He saw men who spoke of God but trembled. He saw leaders who quoted promises but could not calm their own people. He understood something important. Fear was ruling from within. They live expecting the worst. Nimrod once said to a nearby group. "After what happened, who wouldn't expect it?" a man replied. "Fear keeps them weak," Nimrod retorted, "and the weak build nothing that lasts." These words began to circulate, not as a confrontation with God, but as an alternative. Nimrod wasn't saying that God didn't exist. He was merely suggesting that it wasn't wise to depend entirely on him. "We need visible security," he said. "Something we can touch," he added. The people listened attentively. The idea seemed sensible to those who lived with heavy hearts. Gradually, Nimrod began to offer something the elders couldn't, a sense of control. "As long as I'm here, no one will be caught by surprise," he said. "I confront the danger before it reaches you." People began to breathe a sigh of relief when he was around. Ro's presence lessened the immediate fear. And where fear diminishes, confidence takes its place. "When Nimrod is with us, we sleep better," said a woman. "He protects us," the husband replied. Without realizing it, the people began to depend more on a man than on God. Important decisions were now being brought to Nimrod. Before they sought out the elders, before they prayed, now they asked, "What does Nimrod think? What does Nimrod decide?" Protection began to transform into authority. He didn't need to ask for power. It was given to him by collective fear. The elders tried to warn them. "That's not healthy," one of them said. "He's taking a place that isn't his," another commented. But the people didn't want to listen. "You talk about faith," a man replied, "but it gives us security." Nimrod understood that fear could unite more people than obedience. Frightened people accept orders easily. They give up freedom in exchange for protection. "While they fear, they continue," he said in a low voice. Gradually, his word began to carry more weight than old advice. His presence began to determine decisions. His strength became the rule. Fear, which once led men to kneel before God, now made them line up behind a visible leader. Faith was being replaced by control. Trust was being redirected, and almost no one noticed when the line was crossed. What began as protection ended as dominion. What seemed like care became absolute command. Nimrod no longer merely defended, he ruled. And the question that began to emerge, heavy and silent, remained without a clear answer in the hearts of the few who still remembered who should be at the center. And when fear reigns, who really holds the power? Before we move on, please show your support, subscribe to the channel, and click like. This helps us continue to bring profound stories like that of Nimrod, a leader who used fear, unity, and power to replace dependence on God. Now, let's continue. Because the Tower of Babel concealed a much greater purpose than it appeared, the answer came not in words, but in actions. The people no longer moved as before. Families who had previously roamed freely began to settle down. The tents ceased to be temporary. The land began to be marked as property. Something new was being born before everyone's eyes. In the heart of the plain, 3 names began to stand out: Babel, Erech, and Akkad. The Bible records this moment in Genesis 10:10, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, and Akkad in the land of Shinar. They weren't just villages. They were planned cities. For the first time, men lived together under a single human command. Everything had order, function, and direction, and that direction came from Nimrod. "Here we will build," he said, pointing to the wide expanse of land. "And why don't we move on?" the man asked. "Because we will remain here," Nimrod replied firmly. The people began to organize themselves. Some cut wood, others molded clay, others kept watch. Each person had a defined role. Life began to revolve around the city, no longer around the family or the clan. Previously, the father ran the household. Previously, the elder guided the people. Now everyone awaited the word of just one man who decides that. Someone once asked. Nimrod was the immediate reply. He did not proclaim himself king. He didn't need to. Power was handed to him little by little. First as protection, then as leadership, now as total authority. Cities grew rapidly. Walls appeared. Roads were opened. The feeling of security increased. But along with it grew something heavier. Dependence. "We are safe here," the people said. "No one here distracts us," others added. But something had profoundly changed. Obedience to God was beginning to be replaced by obedience to the system. The divine command to spread across the earth was being ignored in favor of permanence. Cox, now older, watched with unease. "God sent us on a journey," he told his son one night. "God sent us to live," Nimrod replied. "And here we will live better." Cities ceased to be mere shelters and became centers of power. What was once personal influence was now transformed into structure. Rules were created. Decisions were centralized. Questioning came to be seen as a threat to order. "We've never had anything like this before," an elder remarked. "Now we are strong," another replied. "Or are we being controlled now?" The first one murmured almost inaudibly. The kingdom was formed not by divine decree, but by human fear. Not by obedience, but by convenience. It was the first empire in history, built not on faith, but on control. Nimrod's power no longer depended on his physical presence. It resided in the walls, in the rules, in the organization. Dominion ceased to be personal and became structural. And while Babel, Erech, and Akkad established themselves as centers of human authority, a question began to silently trouble the few who still remembered God's purpose for humanity. Why concentrate so many men in one place? The question remained unspoken by a few, but most were already too busy to reflect. Cities were growing, roads were connecting, decisions were being made faster and faster. Something made all of this possible almost perfectly. They all spoke the same language. The Bible records this detail clearly in Genesis 11:1. Now the whole earth had one language and a single speech. There was no confusion. There was no misunderstandings. When someone spoke, everyone understood. When an order was given, it spread quickly. Communication flowed like water on level ground. Nimrod recognized the value of this before everyone else. When everyone understands each other, everything moves faster, he said at a meeting with the leaders. "There's no arguing," one of them replied. "There are no delays," Nimrod added, "and there is no resistance." His words became daily practice. Orders went from one point to every corner of the cities. The people worked as one body. Each one knew what to do. Each one knew their role. "It's easier this way," one worker said to the other. "We don't need to think too much," the companion replied. "Just obey." At first, unity seemed like a good thing. It brought organization, it brought speed, it brought visible results. Construction progressed, security increased. The people felt strong for being together. "We are one people," they said. "We are one voice." But little by little, something changed. Unity ceased to be natural and became a requirement. Thinking differently began to cause unease. Questioning was seen as a sign of backwardness. Anyone who disagreed with the pace was considered a problem. "Why do we have to do everything this way?" an older man once asked. "Because everyone does it," another replied. "What if I'm wrong?" the old man insisted. "So everyone makes mistakes together," the youngest concluded. Nimrod no longer needed to be present to be obeyed. His way of thinking had already spread along with the common language. His ideas were repeated without question. His worldview became the standard. "Unity is strength," he said publicly. "Unity is security," the people repeated. But true unity which comes from God is born of obedience and love, not control. Their unity was being used as a tool. Anyone who spoke differently was corrected. Anyone who insisted was isolated. Don't cause trouble, a supervisor warned a worker. I only asked a question, he replied. Questions break the unity, the other concluded. Perfect communication began to silence conscience. The right words were expected. The right phrases were repeated. Faith, which demands reflection and dependence, began to lose ground. Previously the people sought God in silence. Now he repeated orders aloud before I waited for guidance from heaven. Now he was waiting for instructions from the system. Cush was no longer among the leaders. The older elders were listened to less and less. The new generation grew up learning to repeat, not to discern. That's how it works, they said. It's always been like this. They claimed, even though they knew it wasn't. The unit had become an invisible prison. Everything flowed too fast to allow for awareness. Everything worked too well to allow for questioning. And while the whole earth spoke one language, a silent doubt began to arise in the hearts of the few who still remembered how God works with mankind. What if this unity did not come from God? Doubt lingered in a few hearts, but most had already made their choice. The paths that once led far away now led to a single place. A plain of Shinorad stretched out wide, flat, and fertile. It was easy to build on, easy to watch over, easy to control. The Bible describes this moment in Genesis 11:2. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. They lived there. They didn't pass. They did not cross. They stayed. Nimrod realized that this place served his purpose perfectly. No difficult terrain, no constant displacement. There the people could remain united under one leadership. We don't need tents here anymore, he said, walking across the plain. Here we can build something that will last. One of the leaders replied. The tents, symbols of passage and dependence, began to disappear. In their place, sturdy houses arose, built to last. The people stopped preparing to leave and began to plan for routes. We will no longer live as if we are just passing through, Nimrod declared at a public meeting. We've walked too far already, a man agreed. Now it's time to stay, another added. The idea was well received. Walking required faith. Staying still required only organization. The dispersal ordained by God in the days of Noah began to seem too dangerous for a people who had learned to trust and control. Spreading weakens, said Nimrod. United we are strong, the people repeated. The city began to take shape. Streets were laid out. Spaces were defined. Everything had a function and a purpose. Life began to revolve around that fixed place. Security came from the walls. Trust came from proximity. We are safe here, said a mother, closing the door at night. No one can separate us here, the husband replied. But something profound was being abandoned. God had commanded that men should spread across the earth, not concentrate in a single place. Obedience was gradually being set aside without direct confrontation, simply for convenience. God commanded us to fill the earth, murmured an old man, almost forgotten. We're already filling up this place, replied a young man without realizing the difference. Nimrod led every decision. Where to build, how to organize, who to watch over. The people felt safe, but this security came at a price. The freedom to follow God's direction was being traded for the stability of a human system. As long as we are here, nothing will overtake us, Nimrod said to those closest to him. Not even the sky. Someone replied jokingly. The city came to be seen as invincible, permanent, a refuge against any future threat. The fear of the flood was being combed, not with faith, but with perseverance. Gradually, the idea of spreading out began to cause discomfort. What if we separate? Someone asked. We'll lose everything, another replied. So, we'll stay, the group concluded. The decision was sealed without ceremony. There was no written decree, just the collective choice to remain. The city that would never fall began to exist, not only in stone, but in the minds of the people. The walk is over. The pilgrimage has ended. The addiction has been left behind. And while the plain of shore filled with sturdy buildings and human certainties, a question insisted on arising silently, ignored by most, but alive in the hearts of those who still remembered the Creator's words. But God had commanded mankind to scatter. The idea of staying began to take shape in the weary hands of the people. The noise of brick ovens. It became part of the daily routine. The fire burned from early morning. The clay was molded, dried, and fired. The work was hard. Sweat poured down. The pain in the arms was constant. But nobody stopped. Nimrod walked among the furnaces, observing everything carefully. He knew that effort unites more than words. Those who work together suffer together, and those who suffer together accept staying together. Each brick is a step toward our safety, he told the assembled groups. Here we are building our survival. The people began to believe it. Staying together seemed like the only way to stay alive. Dispersal, once seen as obedience to God, began to be treated as an unnecessary risk. If we spread out, we become weak, said a man, wiping the sweat from his face. Alone we're easy prey, another replied. Nimrod reinforced the idea calmly and firmly. United, no one can defeat us, he said. Separated, we will be forgotten. The words found fertile ground. The ancient fear of the flood still lived in memory. The idea of wandering aimlessly seemed too dangerous. To remain, to build, and to protect oneself sounded sensible. God commanded us to walk, murmured an old man observing the ovens. God sent us to live, a young man replied. And here we are alive. Gradually obedience began to be seen as a threat. The divine order to spread out began to seem contrary to safety. Those who remembered God's words were treated as people who put everything at risk. Why insist on this now, they asked. Look around. Everything is working. Hard work occupied the mind. There was no time for reflection. The noise of the furnaces left no room for silence, and without silence there was no prayer. Without prayer there was no dependence. The more we build, the stronger we become, said Nimrod. The stronger we are, the less we need to fear. Permanence became the goal. The city ceased to be a refuge and became a promise. The people were no longer preparing to leave. They were preparing to stay forever. The tents almost completely disappeared. In their place, sturdy walls arose. Life began to be planned for generations in the same place. My children will grow up here, said a woman proudly. Their children too, the husband replied. Nimrod watched with satisfaction. The dream was becoming reality. Not just a fixed city, but a fixed mindset. A people who no longer wanted to depend on the sky, but on the ground they built. God asks us for faith, said an old man already weary. Faith doesn't protect walls. Someone replied, bricks provide protection. The phrase spread. What was once trust in God was now trust in what one could touch. Distraction came to be called weakness. Obedience, risk, persistence, wisdom. Without realizing it, the people began to see God as an obstacle to their plan for security. They didn't say it aloud, but they thought it. After all, if they obeyed, they would have to abandon everything they were building. If God tells us to leave, someone began, we're not leaving. Another replied, that would destroy everything. The thought was dangerous, but it seemed logical to human eyes. The dream of permanence was complete. The people no longer wanted to walk with God. They wanted God to accept the place they had chosen. And while the kilns continued to burn, the bricks piled up and the people became convinced that staying meant surviving. A question began to silently arise, too heavy to be spoken aloud, but impossible to ignore. What if God was seen as the true enemy of this plan? The idea arose while the fire still burned in the furnaces, and the people no longer spoke of leaving. The ground was firm beneath their feet. The walls were rising, the city seemed safe, but Nimrod knew that something was still missing. Staying was not enough. It was necessary to leave a mark on the world. It was necessary to leave a sign that no one could ignore. He gathered his closest leaders together one late afternoon when work was beginning to wind down and fatigue made the men more attentive to the promises. We built houses, Nimrod began. We built walls. We built security. The men nodded. But that's still not enough, he continued. We need something bigger. One of the leaders frowned. Bigger how? Something that can be seen from afar, Nimrod replied. Something that will last forever. Silence fell over the group. A mark, said another man in a low voice. A sign of our strength, Nimrod added. That's when the idea was first mentioned. We will build a tower. Some exchanged glances, others held their breath. A tower so tall, Nimrod explained, that it reaches the heavens. The proposal spread through the city like wildfire. In a short time, the entire population was talking about it. The Bible records this moment in Genesis 11:4. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. The tower was not just a building, it was a symbol, it was a promise, it was a challenge. If we touch the sky, said a man excitedly, we will never be forgotten. Nothing can destroy us. Another replied, the sky, once remembered as a place of awe and reverence, began to change its meaning. It was no longer just the dwelling place of God. It became a limit to be reached, a space to be conquered. Nimrod walked among the people as the excitement grew. The sky is watching us, he said. Now it will see what we are capable of. Some felt pride, others felt a pang in their chest, but dared not question it. The tower represented everything they had built up to that point. Unity, strength, permanence, and control. No one has ever done anything like this before, said one worker. That's why we'll do it, another replied. The plans began to be drawn up. The best materials were selected. The strongest workers were chosen. Everything revolved around the new construction. The city seemed small in comparison to the project. This tower will protect us. The people said, she will be our guarantee. But something silent and dangerous was happening at the heart of that idea. Heaven was ceasing to be a place of prayer and becoming a human objective. It was no longer where one looked for help. It was where one pointed, saying, we're going to get there. An elder tried to warn them. Heaven is not our destination, he said, his voice weary. It is the throne of God, and God gave us intelligence, replied a young man. Let's use it. The phrase was readily accepted. After all, no one was saying they were fighting against God. They simply wanted to prove that they no longer needed to depend on him. The tower began to be seen as an anticipated victory, a monument that would show the world that man had overcome fear, judgment, and the need to bow down. Nimrod watched everything in silence. He knew that this project would change everything, not just the landscape, but the hearts of the people. The sky, once distant and sacred, was now treated as an attainable goal. Faith gave way to ambition, reverence to challenge, and as plans for the tower spread across the plain of Shinar, a question began to arise, still faint, but fraught with danger in the hearts of those who still remembered who rules the heavens. What, after all, is the point of reaching for the sky? Excitement swept through the city. The tower project was no longer just talk among leaders, it was on everyone's lips. Everywhere the same words were repeated as if they had been rehearsed. There was no doubt. There was no hesitation. There was one phrase that united everyone. "Let's make a name for ourselves," they said. The phrase echoed through the streets, on construction sites, in evening gatherings. It was short, powerful, and easy to remember. Gradually it came to define the purpose of everything. The tower was no longer just tall. It was the path to human glory. The Bible records this moment clearly, not as a detail, but as the intention of the heart. The people were no longer talking about pleasing God. They were talking about being remembered. "Our name will be known," said one worker proudly. "Our children will talk about us," another replied. "The world will know who we are," a third person added. The glory that was once attributed to God for harvests, for life, and for protection began to shift. The focus was no longer on heaven. It was on the work. It was on human names. Nimrod watched intently. He didn't need to ask for worship. He didn't need to demand honor. The people themselves began to offer it. "If it weren't for Nimrod, none of this would exist," they said. "He gave us direction." Others said, "He brought us together," they repeated. Nimrod's name became associated with everything that went right, with order, with security, with a vision for the future. When someone solved something important, his name was remembered. When a problem arose, his word was sought. "Ask Nimrod," it became a common saying. The meetings began to change in tone. Before, the men recalled stories of the flood, spoke of God's power, and cited ancient promises. Now they spoke of growth, greatness, and permanence. "We are building something bigger than ourselves," a leader said. "We are building who we are," another corrected. The difference was subtle but profound. Simple chants arose among the people. They were not prayers. They were declarations of pride. "We are strong. We are united. Our name will endure." An old man tried to remember what had been forgotten. "The name that endures is the Lord's," he said in a weak voice. "The Lord is watching us," a young man replied. "But now it's our turn." The old man fell silent. He knew something had changed. When a man's name grows, his heart turns away from God without him realizing it. Divine glory was not forcibly taken away. It was slowly replaced, first by work, then by the system, now by the human name. Nimrod did not interrupt. He did not correct. He did not warn. He walked among the people while veneration grew. His name was mentioned with respect, sometimes with fear, sometimes with silent admiration. "He brought us all the way here," they said. "He will keep us here." The tower continued to rise, but something invisible rose along with it. Pride, the certainty that man had found his own path, the conviction that he no longer needed to look to the sky for direction. The human name occupied the center. Human endeavors defined the future. The human voice replaced the divine one. And while crowds repeated the same phrase, believing they had found security in their own greatness, a question began to weigh on the hearts of the few who still remembered the Creator. When a man's name becomes greater, where does God's name fit in? The question hung in the air, but found no immediate answer, and time passed. The tower continued to rise day after day, level after level, stone upon stone. The sky remained the same, no thunder, no signal, no visible warning. The silence seemed absolute. The people watched the top of the building and then looked up, expecting something to happen. But nothing came. No voice, no judgment, no impediment. "God didn't stop us," said one worker, wiping the sweat from his face. "If it were wrong, something would have already happened," another replied. These words began to spread rapidly. Silence came to be interpreted as approval. The absence of judgment became a sign of agreement. Nimrod realized this before everyone else. He walked through the construction site, observing the growing confidence. Each day, without interference, strengthened his position. Each peaceful dawn increased the people's conviction that they were on the right path. "The sky is watching us," he said calmly, and he remained silent. Someone added. Silence became an argument. "If God were against us, he would have already acted," they asserted. "The fact that nothing happened proves that we are right." But God's silence was never permission. It was always patience. The oldest residents still remembered it. Some elders whispered amongst themselves, "God does not act according to human time." One of them said, "He's waiting," another replied. "And when it acts, it's definitive," a third person added. But those voices were weak compared to the noise of the construction. The sound of the tools was louder than any warning. The constant movement left no room for reflection. The tower became a symbol of anticipated victory. Each new floor was celebrated. The people celebrated their own progress. "We are winning," they said. "Nothing can stop us." Nimrod began to speak with even more confidence. "Follow," he said. "Continue. The sky cannot stop us." He didn't say that God approved. He didn't need to. The silence did that work for him. The deception grew without direct confrontation. There was no open rebellion, only excessive confidence. "We've never been so far from fear," one man commented. "We've never been so close to heaven," another replied. But that was precisely where the danger lay. Silence was being mistaken for absence, patience for agreement, divine waiting for indifference. The tower advanced. Pride grew stronger. Human certainty solidified. The people no longer asked whether they should continue. They simply followed. "God is with us," they affirmed. "If it weren't for that, we would have already been stopped." Nimrod believed this, or at least he wanted to believe it. The silence reinforced his conviction that he had surpassed the old limits, that the world had changed, that man had grown, but the sky wasn't empty. It was just waiting. And as the tower drew closer to the clouds, as the people celebrated the lack of an answer as a victory, a question began to form, silent and dangerous in the depths of the story. What if God's silence wasn't approval, but just wait? The wait seemed to have ended in favor of mankind. The tower remained standing. The sky remained silent, and that was enough to transform caution into certainty. The city entered a celebratory mood. There were speeches, public gatherings, and promises of a secure future. Nimrod began to speak more boldly. "We got here with our own hands," he said to the assembled people. "We worked together. We think together. We built together." People listened attentively. His words brought comfort. After all, everyone could see the results before their very eyes. "We don't need to live in fear anymore," Nimrod continued. "We no longer need to wait for signs from heaven." Some felt a slight discomfort upon hearing that, but no one interrupted. The tone wasn't one of direct confrontation with God. It was one of silent substitution. "God gave us intelligence," said a man in the crowd. "And now we use that intelligence," another replied. The celebrations reinforced the idea of progress. Simple music was played. Children ran around. The leader smiled. Everything seemed in order. The system worked. The tower grew. The city prospered. "We've never been so organized," said one shopkeeper. "We've never been stronger," another replied. Nimrod began to assert something new. Little by little, "We will no longer depend on the invisible," he once said to a close group. "Now we control our destiny." These words were not spoken as open rebellion. They were presented as maturity, as progress, as liberation from old fear. "We don't need to wait any longer," he said. "We decided independence from God began to be seen as a virtue. Dependence on God came to be treated as a weakness of the past." "God helped us in the beginning," someone commented. "Now it's our turn," another replied. The oldest elders walked away in silence. They knew something serious was happening. When man begins to believe he controls his own destiny, his heart closes to the voice of God who supports all this. One of them murmured, observing the tower. "We," replied a young man without hesitation. The rebellion didn't come with shouts or weapons. It came with applause, with well-organized speeches, with promises of stability. It was disguised as progress. Nimrod did not deny God publicly. He merely rendered him unnecessary. And that was more dangerous than a direct denial. "If something goes wrong, we'll fix it," he said. "We have nothing to fear." The people believed. After all, everything seemed solid. But the invisible foundation that supported the world was being ignored. Trust had been taken from the Creator and placed in the human system. The tower stood as a symbol of this new belief. A world where man decides, controls, and governs without needing to look to the sky. Independence from God became the highest ideal. And while the celebrations continued, while the speeches promised eternal security, a question began to silently emerge, too heavy to be answered with revelry, but impossible to ignore. When God is rejected, who sustains the world? The question went unanswered publicly, but it had already been answered in silence on the building's highest levels. There, where few ventured, the wind was stronger, and the city seemed small. The people below were like moving dots. Those who ascended felt something new, a sense of control. Nimrod liked that place. He gathered only the closest leaders, men who didn't question, men who had proven their loyalty to the system. The ascent was made in silence. Step by step, the noise of the city faded into the distance. "This is enough," said Nimrod, stopping near the edge. The men looked around. The view was expansive. The sky seemed closer. The tower was already the tallest structure the world had ever seen. "Do you know why we're doing this?" Nimrod asked. Some nodded, others remained silent. "For protection," one of them replied. "So that we don't get scattered," said another. Nimrod raised his hand, asking for silence. "That's what people believe," he said calmly. "But that's not all." The men looked at each other. "The tower is not just shelter," Nimrod continued. "It is a position of authority." "Position?" asked a leader, confused. "A place of government," Nimrod replied. "A center that does not depend on heaven." The wind picked up. The silence grew heavy. "As long as they look up," Nimrod explained, "they will see our work. They will not ask for directions. They will accept orders." One of the men swallowed hard. "Isn't that dangerous?" he asked hesitantly. "The danger lies in depending on the invisible," Nimrod replied. "Man needs something firm." There the true purpose was revealed. The tower was not for defense. It was not merely a symbol. It was a silent challenger system that occupied the space of divine authority. "Heaven rules from afar," said Nimrod. We will rule from here. The words were not spoken in anger. They were spoken with conviction. For him, this was progress. It was evolution. It was liberation from ancient fear. When the tower is complete, he continued, no one will ask what God wants anymore. They will ask what we are doing now. Some leaders felt pride, others felt fear, but none came down. They all knew that by remaining there, they were choosing a side. The tower ceased to be a building and became throne, not a declared throne, but a center of authority against heaven. A place where man placed himself above fear and dependence. We are changing the world, said one leader. We are creating a new world, Nimrod replied. Down below, the people still believed they were building for protection. They didn't know that at the top the purpose had changed. The tower no longer pointed to God, it pointed against him. The sky was no longer a dwelling place. It was a limit to be overcome. Human creations occupied the space that was once reserved for reverence. Nimrod gazed at the horizon and spoke in a low voice. Man no longer needs to bow down. The sentence hung in the air. The tower grew. The challenge was set. And as the leaders descended in silence, carrying a secret that would change everything, an inevitable question began to weigh on history itself. But would God allow that? The question wasn't answered at the top of the tower, but the answer was already on its way. It didn't come in the form of thunder, it didn't come as a strong wind. It came from where it always was, from the sky that men had decided to defy. The Bible describes this moment with few words, but words full of weight. In Genesis 11:5, then the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the sons of men were building. God comes down, not because I was far away, not because I needed to see better, but because the time for observation had ended. The divine gaze swept across all of Babel. It saw the organized city, the crowded streets, the lit ovens, the tower growing. It saw a united people, but not in obedience, united in defiance, united against the purpose he had established since Noah. Down below, nothing seemed different. The work continued. The orders were given. The people repeated the same words. The sky remained silent. Today we've moved up another level, said a supervisor confidently. We're almost there, another replied. They didn't know that the sky had already come down. God was not impressed by the height of the tower. He did not feel threatened by the structure. What caught his attention was the heart behind it, a heart that had traded dependence for control, faith for human security, reverence for pride. Behold, the people are one, declared the Lord, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. The unity, which could have been a blessing, had become a danger. When men unite far from God, nothing limits them. Evil organizes itself. Error is strengthened. Rebellion becomes a system. Nimrod at that moment still felt in control. His leaders obeyed. The people followed. The tower advanced. To him the silence of the sky still seemed like victory. Nothing will stop us, he said to a man nearby. There are many of us, the other replied. We are one, Nimrod concluded. But there was something they couldn't control. Divine decision. God didn't need to destroy the city with fire. He didn't need to repeat the flood. The judgment would be precise, direct, and sufficient. It would strike exactly at the root of everything. The intervention was approaching. Heaven was not absent. It was watching. Every word repeated by the people. Every order given. Every brick laid as a substitute for faith was seen. God didn't come down to negotiate, he came down to act. And while men believed they were building the future, while unity seemed indestructible, a question began to form, weighty and inevitable, about to find its answer. What will God do with a world united against him? The answer did not come as many expected. There was no fire falling from the sky. There were no walls collapsing. There were no war cries. The judgment began almost imperceptibly in the middle of an ordinary workday. The sun rose, as usual. The men arrived at their posts. Orders began to be given from the top of the tower. Bring more clay, shouted a supervisor. The man below looked up confused. What, he replied. Browning mud. More mud. The supervisor repeated, annoyed. The worker shook his head. I don't understand what you're saying. Others began to turn around. Voices mingled. Familiar words sounded strange. Common sounds lost their meaning. Confusion spread quickly. The Bible describes this moment in Genesis 11:7. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there so that they will not understand each other. What sustained the entire system was the unity of language, and God touched precisely that area. Are you mocking me? A man shouted. I can't understand you, another replied desperately. The order stopped working. There was no more coordination. There was no more command. Shouts overlapped. Gestures replaced words. But nothing worked. Stop, a leader tried to shout. Nobody obeyed. Not out of rebellion, but due to misunderstanding. The workers stopped. Tools fell to the ground. Men moved away from each other. Small groups began to form, brought together only by those who still spoke the same language. Chaos took over the plain. Nimrod hurried down when he realized something was wrong. He tried to speak to his leaders, but received only blank stares. Gather the people, he ordered. They stared at him, speechless. Talk to me, he insisted. Nothing. The empire began to crumble right there, without a sword, without an enemy army, without organized resistance. The loss of communication was all it took for everything to collapse. The unity built outside of God proved fragile. Control vanished. The tower, a symbol of power, became merely an empty structure. Families began to leave. Groups went their separate ways. The dispersal, which had been rejected, was now happening without choice. "We need to leave," someone said. "Where to?" another asked, receiving no answer. Nimrod watched everything in silence. What had taken years to build crumbled in a few hours. His dominion could not withstand the invisible touch of God. Human power fell without the noise of war. It fell in silence. It fell in chaos. It fell because its foundation was not heaven. The tower remained incomplete. Babel lost its center. The name they sought to exalt began to dissolve among different languages. And while the people scattered, while the system crumbled before everyone's eyes, one question remained alive, heavy and unsettling, echoing behind everything that had happened. And Nimrod, what was he really trying to do? The question did not go unanswered for long. Ruins of Babel, they spoke for themselves. What was once noise, order, and ambition was now silence, scattered stones, and empty paths. The tower remained unfinished, a warning to all generations. Nimrod was there, not as a king, not as a leader, just as a man facing the failure of his own system. The people had scattered, the leaders had left, the dominion had vanished. He observed the fallen stones, the interrupted levels of the tower, and understood something he had never admitted aloud. It wasn't just confusion, he murmured, it was a trial. The secret was beginning to be revealed. Nimrod never just wanted to protect his people. He never just wanted to prevent another flood. What he tried to build was much bigger and much more dangerous. He tried to interrupt God's plan. From the beginning, God had promised redemption to humanity, a lineage, a future, a Messiah who would come in due time. For this to happen, men needed to spread out, form nations, and fulfill God's purpose. But Nimrod tried to stop it. His plan was to create an eternal system without God and absolute human government, an organized world where man would not need heaven, where there would be no waiting, promises, or dependence, where everything would be controlled down here. The tower was not a ladder to climb to heaven. It was a throne to rule the earth. If they stay here, he used to say, nothing will separate them. If they stay united, they won't have to wait for anyone. That was the real challenge. Nimrod didn't want to ascend to God. He wanted I replaced it. The system he created carried a new spirit in history. The idea that man can take the place of the Creator, that he can govern without submission, that he can decide the future without divine promise. It was first Antichrist's spirit, not one man against Christ who does not yet exist, but a system against the messianic plan. That is why God acted. That is why Babel fell. That's why the unity was broken. It wasn't just a confusion of languages. It was the preservation of the eternal plan. Nimrod understood too late. His name was not exalted. His tower did not reach the sky. His system did not endure. But something of him was not destroyed with the stones. The idea survived. The idea of a world without God, of security without faith, progress without obedience, completely controlled by humans. Nimrod disappeared from visible history, but the spirit he released continued to walk the earth. It appeared in empires, in systems, in governments, in hearts. Whenever man tries to take the place of God, Babel is reborn. The ruins were left behind, but the lesson has endured through the centuries. God's plan was not interrupted. The Messiah would come. The promise would be fulfilled. No human system could prevent it, but the confrontation would continue. And the last question doesn't belong only to the past. It echoes to this day, crossing generations, reaching us as a silent and eternal warning. The spirit of Nimrod. Did he really die? The ruins remained. The tower was never completed. People scattered across the land. But the story of Babel did not end there. It merely changed form. Nimrod was the first man to attempt to rule without God. Not with swords, not with direct violence, but with a system. He showed that it's possible to push God away without denying his existence. You just have to make him unnecessary. You just have to put human control at the center. You just have to trade dependence for apparent security. That is what we learned from Nimrod. Babel was not just an ancient city. It was a role model, a mindset, a way of thinking, a place where man says, I'll handle it, I'm in control, I decide. And that thought did not die with the stones of the tower. Today, Babel still exists. She appears in governments who believe they can organize the world without God, in religions that replace the spirit with rules and structures, in systems they promise security, but demand blind obedience, and often in human hearts who no longer pray, no longer hope, no longer trust. Whenever man tries to take the place of God, Babel rises up again. God did not destroy Babel out of fear of man. He destroyed in order to preserve his plan. The plan of redemption, the Messiah's plan, the plan to restore what was lost in Eden. This plan was never destroyed. It was never late. He was never defeated, but it always has been and always will be confronted. The story of Nimrod invites us to look inward and ask a simple yet profound question. In whom have we placed our trust? In the sky or in the towers we build? Because every time man chooses to control instead of trust, Babel begins to echo again and God continues to watch. If this story resonated with you, 2 videos will appear on your screen with biblical accounts of people who also had to choose between trusting God or following their own path. Click subscribe to the channel and leave a like. May the God who stopped Babel continue guide your steps today, because whenever mind tries to govern without God, the echo of Nimrod sounds.